Some stories aren't written. They're survived. Across the United States, behind the glow of city lights and the charm of quiet suburbs, there are places people don't talk about, and events they wish had never happened. A girl who vanished. In a parking lot. Her phone still recording. A man who heard scratching inside his walls, long after the house was empty. Each of these tales was lived. Each one left a scar. And tonight you'll hear 12 of the most disturbing true horror stories from across America. They don't start with once upon a time. They begin with a knock, a scream, a silence that lasted too long. So lean in and listen closely. Because the scariest part of these stories, they didn't happen in the dark. They happened in places just like where you live. The air felt alive with whispers of rain, but the silence inside the house was a predator waiting to strike. It was a sweltering July evening last year when my world turned upside down. A violent storm had swept through my small town, its winds howling like a pack of wolves, tearing down power lines and plunging my home into an oppressive darkness. I work remotely, my laptop the heartbeat of my livelihood, so this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a disaster that threatened to unravel everything. The repair crew promised a fix within days, but their vague assurances felt like empty echoes in the void. With no electricity, no internet, and the faint hum of a dying generator as my only companion, I knew I couldn't stay. I needed an escape, a temporary sanctuary to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. Airbnb became my lifeline, but in a town this small, options were as scarce as sunlight in a storm. The only place I could afford was a 45-minute drive away, tucked in a neglected corner of the city, where the streets felt too quiet, the shadows too deep. It's just a few nights, I told myself, clinging to the hope that this would be a simple solution to a temporary problem. But deep down, a flicker of unease stirred, a premonition I couldn't shake. The house I rented was a squat, weary bungalow, its faded gray exterior peeling under the weight of years. A single porch light flickered, casting jagged shadows across a lawn choked with weeds. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires, the sound sharp against the stillness of the evening. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew, a damp heaviness that clung to my skin. The living room held a sagging couch, its fabric frayed at the edges, and a coffee table marred with scars of neglect, water rings and faint scratches that told stories of forgotten tenants. The floorboards groaned with every step, their protests echoing through the empty space. A narrow hallway led to a small bedroom, where a lumpy mattress sat beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of mothballs. I dropped my bags, the weight of the day pressing down on me, and collapsed onto the bed. Just rest, I thought, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. But as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, a memory clawed its way to the surface. A night from years ago, when I'd woken in my old apartment to the sound of footsteps outside my door. They'd stopped abruptly, leaving me frozen in the dark, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't name. Not now, I whispered to myself, shoving the memory aside. But the past has a way of lingering, doesn't it? Morning arrived, cloaked in a gray haze that filtered through cracked blinds. I dragged myself to the living room, setting up my laptop on a wobbly desk that creaked under the weight of my equipment. The window behind it framed a desolate view, bare trees stretching like skeletal hands toward a sky that refused to brighten. I tried to focus, diving into emails and virtual meetings, clinging to the rhythm of work to anchor me in this unfamiliar place. But the house felt wrong, its silence too heavy, its shadows too deep. Then a sharp rap at the door sliced through, the stillness jarring me from my thoughts. Who could it be? My pulse quickened, a cold sweat prickling at the base of my neck. This wasn't my home. I had no obligation to answer. Yet curiosity, that dangerous pull, drew me to the peephole. A man stood on the porch, his presence as jarring as the knock itself. He looked to be in his early 30s, his arms a tapestry of tattoos, snakes coiling around his forearms, skulls grinning from his biceps, thorns dripping with inked blood. His eyes were shadowed beneath a low brow, his expression unreadable, devoid of the warmth I'd expect from an Airbnb host. He didn't carry the polished air of a salesman, nor the casual demeanor of a neighbor. Walk away, my instincts urged, a primal warning that vibrated through my bones. I obeyed, retreating to my desk, my fingers trembling as I typed. But his image lingered, a dark stain on the edges of my mind, refusing to fade. The day stretched, on each hour a battle to focus amidst the unease that gnawed at me. By 8 p.m., hunger became impossible to ignore, a sharp ache that pulled me from my work. I grabbed my jacket and drove to a nearby diner, its neon sign flickering in the empties. Lot like a dying star, the burger I ordered was tasteless, my thoughts consumed by the man on the porch. Was he watching me even now? I hurried back to the bungalow, the night pressing in around me, thick and suffocating. Settling in with my takeout, the plastic container, cold against my hands, I tried to reclaim some sense of normalcy. Another interruption at the door. My heart lurched, the food forgotten as I crept to the peephole. There he was again, the tattooed man, his silhouette sharper, more menacing under the dim porch light. What does he want from me? The air felt charged, heavy with an unspoken threat, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I backed away, my breath shallow, and forced myself to eat, pretending the world outside didn't exist. "You're safe," I whispered. But the words felt like a lie, crumbling under the weight of my fear. Work became my refuge, a fragile shield against the creeping dread. I slipped on my headphones, sinking into the hum of virtual meetings, the glow of my laptop casting a pale light across the room. Hours passed, the night deepening around me, until exhaustion forced me to stop at 1 a.m. When I powered off my laptop, the darkness surged in, thick and oppressive, wrapping around me like a shroud. I fumbled for the light switch, and as the bulb flickered to life, my world shattered. Muddy shoe prints, faint but unmistakable, snaked across the hardwood floor, weaving a sinister path down the hallway, circling the desk where I'd sat for hours, oblivious to the intrusion. Someone had been here. My chest tightened, each breath a struggle, as if the air itself had turned against me. The prints were fresh, their edges crisp, the mud still glistening in the light. I followed them, dread pooling in my stomach like a lead weight. My footsteps hesitant against the groaning floorboards. They led to the back door, hanging ajar, the night air seeping in like a cold, uninvited guest. How long had it been open? The question echoed in my mind, unanswered, as the reality of my situation sank in. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, descending the stairs with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. My body screamed to run, but I was paralyzed, caught in a nightmare that bled into reality with terrifying clarity. A figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the hallway, the tattooed man, his inked arms gleaming under the flickering light, his face a flicker of surprise that curdled into a rage so raw, stole my breath. He'd been upstairs this whole time, watching, waiting. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and predatory, a hunter sizing up his prey with a patience that chilled me to my core. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, but my voice betrayed me, swallowed by the terror that gripped me. Run. Now. My legs surged forward, propelled by a primal instinct I couldn't ignore. I bolted through the back door, the night swallowing me whole, the cold air biting at my skin as I stumbled into the backyard. The ground was uneven, slick with dew, and I nearly fell as I ran toward a cluster of trees, their branches clawing at my face, my arms, my clothes. I dove behind a gnarled oak, its rough bark scraping against my palms as I crouched low, my breath ragged, my phone trembling in my hands. 911. I dialed, my voice barely a whisper as I gave my location, praying. The darkness would shield me from his gaze. Footsteps crunched through the underbrush, frantic and searching. The sound growing closer, then fading as he moved deeper into the woods. He hadn't found me, but the fear lingered, a shadow I couldn't outrun. The police arrived an eternity. Later, their flashlights cutting through the fog like blades, their voices sharp against the stillness. I led them back to the bungalow, my legs unsteady, the shoe prints still glaring under the harsh light of their beams. They found him the next day, his tattoos a damning signature that confirmed his identity. He was no stranger to crime, a trail of burglaries, assaults, and horrors too grim to recount followed in his wake. The homes he'd violated held stories of shattered lives, of innocence stolen in the dead of night. What had he planned for me? The question haunts me, a relentless specter that refuses to fade. Why had he lingered? A shadow in the house I'd thought was my sanctuary, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I'm back in my own home now, the power restored, the lights blazing against the dark. But safety feels like a fragile illusion. A glass house waiting to shatter with the faintest tap in the night. Some nightmares don't end when you wake up. Have you ever felt a place watching you? Its silence louder than any scream? On the fourth day of my cross-country drive, I found myself lost in Pennsylvania's endless back roads, where the night seemed to swallow the world whole. Rain poured, relentlessly, each drop a cold finger tapping on my windshield, blurring the empty highway stretching into darkness. My fuel gauge glowed red, a desperate warning I couldn't ignore. Feel the dread creeping in, alone, with nowhere to go. I hadn't seen a gas station for hours, just fields and shadows until a faded sign appeared through the mist. Gas station, 1 mile. Relief washed over me, but a deeper instinct whispered, turn back. The station materialized like a phantom, its 2 rusted pumps leaning into the storm, surrounded by skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. A small building crouched behind them, its windows streaked with grime, reflecting the rain's mournful dance. I pulled in, tires grinding on wet gravel, and sat there, the engine's hum a fragile shield against the night. Imagine this, a place so desolate it feels alive with secrets. I stepped out, rain soaking my jacket, and approached the pumps. They were lifeless, no hum, no light, just dust coating the screens like a shroud. I swiped my card, wiped the display, but it stayed dead, mocking my hope. You're stranded now. What choice do you have? The air smelled of damp earth and something sharper, like rot. As I scanned the lot, my breath shallow. A faint glow pulsed from inside the building, not steady like a store light, but flickering, as if something inside were breathing. Picture yourself standing there, rain drenching you, that light pulling you closer like a lure. The glass door was fogged, moisture beading on its surface, distorting the glow into fractured shapes. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped into a tomb. The air was thick, musty, like a space untouched for decades. Empty shelves lined the walls, some toppled, their edges draped in cobwebs that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Broken tiles littered the floor, and the glow came from the back. A lantern, its flame wavering through a shadowed doorway. You're not alone here. You feel it, don't you? My heart thudded, each beat a warning, and I backed out, the rain a cold jolt as I stumbled into the storm. Then I saw him. A figure stood by my car, rain streaming down his soaked jacket, his posture nervingly still. He was peering into my windows, his face hidden by the downpour. Freeze. Your heart's racing now, isn't it? I shouted, my voice lost in the wind. Hey, what are you doing out here? He turned slowly, his gaze locking onto mine, then flicked to the building behind me. I spun around and there, another man emerged from the doorway I'd just left. His hair was long, matted with grime, his skin pale and sickly, as if the sun had never touched him. His eyes burned with something feral, and without a word he charged at me, his boots splashing through puddles, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Run. Run now. I threw myself into the car, hands trembling as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared and I floored the gas, tires spinning on the wet gravel. As I pulled away, a sharp grating noise tore through the night. Metal on metal, the sound vibrating through the frame of my car. I didn't look back, didn't dare. The road blurred ahead, rain lashing the windshield, my pulse pounding in my ears. You're safe now, but are you really? I drove until the tank gave out 30 minutes later, the engine dying on a desolate stretch of highway. I sat there shaking, rain drumming on the roof, and called for help, my voice barely steady. When I finally stepped out to inspect my car, a deep scratch marred the driver's side door, a jagged line that looked like a blade's cruel signature. The police arrived, their lights cutting through the darkness, and I told them everything. My voice trembling as I recounted the station, the men, the chase. Their faces hardened as they shared the truth. That gas station hadn't been operational for over a decade. Let that sink in. 10 years. No one worked there, no one lived there. Yet I'd walked through its doors, seen its light, felt its menace. They found no trace of the men, no footprints in the mud, no evidence at all, just my story and that scratch. What would have happened if you hadn't run? I try not to think about it, but on rainy nights when the world grows quiet, I see that flickering glow in my mind, calling me back to a place that shouldn't exist, a place that still feels alive with something I'll never understand. The forest seemed to hold its breath that night, waiting for us to step into its trap. 10 months ago, I traveled to the quiet hometown of my old college friend, Ethan, a place where the streets whispered secrets under the weight of silence, and the stars above seemed to peer down with cold, unblinking eyes. We had spent days reminiscing, laughing over drinks at the local bar and chasing the ghosts of our shared past. Those were the days when we felt invincible, when every adventure felt like a story we'd tell for years. But on my final night, as the moon hung low, Ethan's voice dropped to a conspiratorial hush, his eyes glinting with a spark I hadn't seen since our wilder days. There's a place, he murmured, leaning closer, a forgotten town deep in the woods. Nobody goes there anymore. Want to see it? My heart thudded, not from fear but from the electric thrill of the unknown. I nodded, sealing our fate, and we stepped into the abyss that waited beyond the trees. The woods enveloped us like a living thing, as we trekked beneath a sun that bled red through the horizon. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something older, something that clung to the back of my throat like a memory I couldn't place. Every step crunched through a carpet of fallen leaves, the sound echoing in the stillness, as if the forest itself was listening. Ethan led the way, his flashlight carving jagged paths through the encroaching twilight, its beam trembling slightly in his grip. Feel the pull of the forest, I told myself. Let it draw you in deeper. We spoke little, our breaths forming faint, clouds in the cooling air, syncing with the rhythmic sway of the trees in the evening breeze. The world felt distant, as if we'd crossed an invisible threshold into a realm that didn't welcome intruders. After what felt like an eternity, the trail we followed vanished entirely, replaced by a faint thread of trampled grass that snaked through the undergrowth. This is it, I thought, my pulse quickening. The edge of the world. The trees parted like a curtain, revealing a cluster of houses, skeletal and silent, their modern frames sagging under the weight of time and neglect. Siding peeled away like blistered skin, windows gaped like hollow eyes staring into nothingness, and a gravel road stretched between them, leading to nowhere. Graffiti scarred the walls, jagged letters in faded red and black screaming names and curses into the void. This wasn't just abandonment, I realized, a chill creeping up my spine. This was a wound, raw and festering. We approached the first house, its doorway a dark maw that seemed to breathe as we neared. The air inside was stale, heavy with the musk of decay and rot, as if the house itself was exhaling the last of its life. Weeds curled through the splintered floorboards, their pale tendrils reaching desperately for a light that had long since abandoned this place. Ethan's flashlight danced across the walls, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like ghosts, and shadows that seemed to shift just beyond its reach. "Why would anyone leave this?" I whispered, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. Ethan shrugged, but his eyes lingered on the corners of the room, as if he sensed something I couldn't. We were kids again, chasing mysteries in the dark, unaware of the eyes that might be watching us from the shadows. Step closer, the house seemed to whisper in my mind, its voice a low hum that vibrated through the floorboards. See what I hide within my walls. Then it came, a sound that shattered the stillness like glass. A heavy thud, deep and resonant, echoed from the gravel road beyond the house. My pulse spiked, a jolt of adrenaline flooding my veins, and Ethan froze, his flashlight trembling violently in his hand. What was that? We turned as one, staring into the dusk, the forest now a wall of impenetrable black beyond the houses. Silence returned, but it was different now, thicker, heavier, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a move. "Keep going," I told myself, trying to steady my racing heart. "It's nothing." We stepped inside, hearts pounding against our rib cages, and explored the barren rooms. The house felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl, its walls pressing in, whispering secrets we couldn't decipher. We climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step groaning under our weight, and found ourselves in a darkness so absolute, it seemed to swallow the light whole. A short hallway stretched before us, leading to 2 doors and a pull-down attic hatch embedded in the ceiling. "Don't look up," my mind screamed, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. But my eyes betrayed me, darting to the hatch as if drawn by an unseen force. As we reached for the first door, another sound stopped us cold. Shuffling footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunched through the grass outside, each step louder, closer, until they paused at the threshold of the house. My breath caught, trapped in my chest, and I felt the air grow colder, heavier, as if the house itself was tensing. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in him before, a fear that mirrored my own. "Someone's here." A voice broke the silence, low and gravelly, like it hadn't been used in decades, each word slurring as if the speaker's mouth was broken. "Hello?" it called, the sound dripping with a menace that made my blood run cold. "I just want to talk. No harm." The words were a lie, a lure, and every instinct in my body screamed to run. But we stood frozen, anchored by a terror so deep it felt like it had rooted us to the floor. "Don't move," I thought, my mind racing. "Don't breathe." The voice fell silent, but the presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. Minutes dragged on, each second a blade pressed against my nerves, my senses straining for any hint of movement. Ethan crept down the stairs, his steps silent, as a ghost's, and peered toward the doorway. He turned back, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with disbelief. "There's no one there," he whispered, his voice trembling. I rushed to see for myself, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The grass outside held a single trail of footprints leading from the other houses, but none leaving. He's still here. The realization hit like a tidal wave, drowning me in panic, and we bolted, tearing through the house, past the gaping doorway and into the trees beyond. The forest closed around us, its branches clawing at our skin, tearing at our clothes as we ran, driven by the certainty that he was behind us, silent, watching, waiting to strike. We stumbled back to Ethan's house hours later, our lungs burning, our minds fractured by what we'd experienced. Who was he? The question haunted us, gnawing at the edges of our thoughts, but the answer was far worse than the unknown. Those footprints, that voice, they weren't human. They were a trap, a lure into something we'd never understand. Something that lived in the ruins of that forgotten town. We survived, I tell myself, clinging to that fragile truth. But at night, when the world falls silent, I hear that voice again, echoing through the darkness, calling from the ruins. "I just want to talk," it whispers, "and I know I'll never truly escape." The forest whispered secrets in the dark, but the silence held a scream I couldn't hear. Last autumn, I set out on a solitary trek through the Cascades National Park, a rugged wilderness where trails stretched like veins through an ancient, untamed heart. The route I'd chosen was an out-and-back path. 3 days to the peak, 3 days back, a journey I'd mapped out for its solitude as much as its beauty. I knew little about the trail, its popularity, its history, but in these remote expanses, that rarely mattered. You could walk for days without crossing another soul, the silence broken only by the rustle of leaves or the distant call of a hawk. I craved that isolation, the chance to lose myself in the rhythm of my own footsteps, the weight of my pack a steady reminder of my purpose. But on the third day, as the sun dipped low, casting golden threads through the pines, I stumbled upon a small campsite nestled in a clearing. A man sat by his tent, his face weathered but kind, his gear worn from years of use. I dropped my pack, grateful for a moment's rest, and we fell into an easy conversation. He introduced himself as Daniel, a fellow hiker planning to spend the night here before pushing to the trail's peak the next day. I shared that I was heading there myself that afternoon, a smile tugging at my lips as I said, "I'll see you up there." He nodded, his eyes crinkling with warmth, and I left with a renewed sense of camaraderie, the kind that blooms briefly in the wild before fading like a footprint in the dirt. I reached the peak that evening, a breathtaking expanse where the mountains unfolded in jagged waves, their tips kissed by the last light of day. The view was a revelation, a moment of peace that felt like a reward for the grueling climb. I set up camp, my tent a small island in the vastness, and settled in for a rest day. But as the hours stretched into dusk, a quiet unease began to settle. In my chest, the trail was empty, no hikers, no voices, not even the distant crack of a twig. I thought of Daniel, the man I'd met who'd promised to reach this peak today. Where was he? Night fell, a heavy blanket of stars above, but his absence gnawed at me. Perhaps he'd turned back, I reasoned, or decided to linger at his campsite for another day. The explanations felt hollow, but I clung to them, unwilling to let my mind wander to darker possibilities. Morning came, crisp and clear, and I packed up, my body aching from the strain of the journey. I'd gotten a late start, the sun already climbing as I began my descent, hoping to reach Daniel's campsite by dusk, but my legs felt heavy, a strange soreness slowing my pace, and by the time the sky bled orange, I was still miles away. I switched on my headlamp, its beam a frail thread in the gathering dark, and pressed on, the forest closing in around me, like a living thing. An hour past sundown, I finally reached the clearing where Daniel's tent stood, its faded green fabric untouched, as if frozen in time. He never left. The realization hit me like a cold wave, my breath catching in my throat. Staying at one campsite for days while backpacking was unusual, a break in the unspoken rhythm of the trail. I called out, my voice trembling in the stillness, asking if he was okay. The silence answered, heavy and unbroken. I stepped closer, my boots sinking into the soft earth, and noticed the tent's flap hanging open, revealing an empty interior. He's gone. A lump formed in my throat, my body sensing a truth my mind refused to accept. I scanned the clearing, the beam of my headlamp darting across the trees, searching for any sign of him. A footprint, a dropped item, anything. Then, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a pinprick of light far out in the woods, steady and unblinking. Drawn to it like a moth to flame, I walked toward it, the darkness pressing closer with every step. 40 yards from the tent, I found the source. A headlamp, its light dim and flickering, abandoned on the forest floor. The batteries were nearly dead, the glow barely enough to illuminate the leaves around it. And then I saw him. A figure stood just 10 yards away, half hidden among the trees, his presence so still it felt unnatural. My gut twisted. He wasn't Daniel. This man was taller, his silhouette sharper, his posture too deliberate, as if he'd been watching me for longer than I'd realized. He doesn't want to be seen. My heart pounded, a primal fear clawing at my chest. I forced the words out, my voice shaking, asking if he needed help. He didn't move, didn't speak, his silence a weight that pressed against me. Leave. Now. I stammered an apology, my hands trembling as I grabbed my pack and hurried back to the tent. The headlamp in the woods blinked out, plunging the forest into a deeper dark. I didn't stop to think. I ran, my boots pounding the trail, the weight of my pack dragging at my shoulders as I pushed through the underbrush. I didn't stop until I'd gone 3 miles, collapsing at the next campsite. My breath ragged, my mind racing with what I'd seen. I reported it as soon as I could, my voice hollow as I recounted the night. The news came later. A gut punch I'd known was coming. Daniel was missing, vanished without a trace in the backcountry where searches were a needle in a haystack. The man I'd seen in the woods was the key to it all, a shadow in the dark that held answers I'd never know. Some truths are buried too deep in the wild. What if the stranger you saw in the dark wasn't just passing by, but waiting for you? I had driven 3 hours to a sleepy town I'd never heard of, a place where the streets felt too still, too silent, like they were holding their breath, in anticipation of something dreadful. I was there for a quick meeting with a client, a one-day stop at an Airbnb before heading home. The neighborhood greeted me with an eerie calm, houses dark, their windows like empty eyes staring into the void, lawns shrouded by towering trees that blocked out the fading light of dusk. As I parked in the driveway, my headlights caught a figure far down the road, walking slowly, their silhouette blending into the deepening shadows. Feel that chill creeping up your spine. Something's not right, is it? They didn't seem out of place at first, just another person in a quiet town. but a cold knot tightened in my stomach, whispering that I was being watched, that I wasn't as alone as I thought. I tried to shake the feeling, unlocked the door, and stepped into the house. It was ordinary. Plain furniture, a small living room, a bedroom down the hall, nothing special, just a place to rest for the night. But the air inside felt heavy, as if the walls themselves held memories of things best forgotten. I dropped my bag, checked the windows, and made sure every lock was secure, my fingers lingering on the cold metal of the deadbolt. Stepping back onto the porch to grab my other bag, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. That same figure from the road now stood in the middle of the street, motionless, facing the house. Picture this: the street empty, the air thick with tension, and their gaze locked on you like a predator sizing up its prey. My pulse quickened, a drumbeat of fear in my chest, but as I started toward my car, they turned and walked away, their steps slow, deliberate, fading into the shadows of the tree-lined street. I watched them disappear, my unease growing like a storm cloud, then hurried back inside, locking the door tight. For extra measure, I opened the garage, pulled my car in, and sealed myself off from the night, the darkness outside pressing against the windows like a living thing. You're safe now, or are you? I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like damp air, a persistent dread that refused to let go. Exhausted and needing to be up early, I forced myself to bed, the silence of the house pressing in around me, heavy and suffocating. Sleep came in fragments, broken by restless dreams of footsteps echoing in the dark, each one closer than the last. My alarm was set for 4:01 a.m., but I jolted awake before it, the darkness outside still thick, suffocating, wrapping the house in a shroud of night. A faint glow seeped under the bedroom door, soft but unnatural, like a candle's flicker in a lifeless house casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. You didn't leave any lights on, did you? I sat up, heart thudding in my chest, trying to remember if I'd overlooked a switch. The glow felt wrong, invasive, a violation of the darkness I'd expected, and as I reached for the door, a faint shuffling sound came from the hallway, a deliberate movement, like someone pacing just out of sight, their presence a weight in the air. Listen closely. You're not alone. My throat tightened and I hesitated, every instinct screaming to stay still, to hide. But I had to know, had to face whatever was out there. I opened the door, the hinges silent, and stepped into the hallway, the cold floor biting at my bare feet. The living room light was on, its harsh glow spilling across the floor, a light I knew I'd turned off before bed. The shuffling grew louder, coming from the living room, and as I crept closer, my blood turned to ice. A man stood in the corner, rifling through my bag, his back to me. He wore a black hoodie, jeans torn at the knees, the same clothes as the figure from the street. He followed you. He's been here all along, waiting for this moment. I froze, barely breathing as he turned, his face pale, eyes hollow, locking onto mine with a chilling intensity. He didn't flinch, didn't startle, just stared, as if he'd known I'd come, as if he'd been waiting for me to step into his trap. Then with a voice low and commanding, he growled, "Stay where you are. Don't move, don't breathe." He dropped the bag, stepping toward me, his movements slow but menacing, each step closing the gap between us, his shadow stretching across the floor like a dark omen. Run. Run now. I turned, adrenaline surging through my veins, and bolted back to the bedroom, slamming the door shut just as his footsteps thundered behind me. A relentless pursuit. My hands shook as I fumbled with the window, throwing it open, the cold night air rushing in like a lifeline. I leapt out, landing hard on the grass, the impact jarring my bones, and sprinted into the darkness, not daring to look back. My lungs burned as I ran, the quiet town now a labyrinth of shadows, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out as if to pull me back. I reached a neighbor's house, banging on their door until they let me in, my voice trembling as I explained everything. The man, the light, the chase. I called the police, my words tumbling out in a rush, and they arrived quickly, their lights cutting through the night. But the house was empty when they searched it. My bags were gone, the bedroom door wide open. He'd gotten in, picked the lock, searched for me, his presence lingering like a ghost. If you'd stayed, what would he have done? The police suspected he wanted more than just my belongings. A thought that still sends shivers down my spine, a fear that claws at me in the quiet moments. I left that town at dawn, the first light of day, a fragile comfort, but the memory of his hollow eyes follows me. A shadow I can't outrun, a fear that whispers I might not be safe even now, even miles away. The lake was too still that night, as if it knew what was coming. Earlier this spring, I drove 4 hours north to a hidden gem I'd found years ago. A small, secluded lake nestled deep in the woods, far from the noise of civilization. It was my sanctuary, a place where the world faded away, leaving only the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the endless whisper of the trees. I arrived under a pale afternoon sky, the air cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet grass. Setting up my tent on the grassy beach, I felt the familiar peace settle over me, like a warm blanket on a cold night. The lake stretched out before me, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the surrounding woods, and not a soul was in sight. This is what I came for, I thought, to be alone, to breathe. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the water, I saw movement on the far side of the lake. A man emerging from the trees, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. He set up a tent, mirroring my own solitude, and for a moment I wondered if I'd been wrong to think I'd have this place all to myself. I watched him from a distance, his movements calm and deliberate, the kind of quiet confidence you'd expect from someone who knew these woods well. Before the sun vanished entirely, he started walking around the lake, his figure growing larger as he approached my campsite. My first instinct was unease. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, you don't expect company. But his smile disarmed. "Hey there," he called, his voice warm. "I'm Nathan, saw you across the lake and thought I'd say hi." He was about my age, mid-20s, with a friendly demeanor that felt genuine. We talked for a while, sharing stories of why we loved this hidden spot. Nathan's laugh was easy, his eyes bright with a shared appreciation for the solitude. "Feel the connection," I told myself. "Let it ground you." We bonded over our love for the quiet, and as the sky darkened, he headed back to his side of the lake, promising to catch up the next day. That night I slept with the glow of that brief companionship warming me, the lake's stillness a quiet lullaby. Morning brought a new energy. Nathan came over early, a 6-pack of beers in hand, and we spent the day on the beach, the sun warming our skin as we talked about everything and nothing. The lake shimmered under the light, its surface catching every ray like 1,000 tiny mirrors, and for a moment, I felt like I'd known Nathan forever. We laughed over shared stories of past adventures, the kind of easy camaraderie you don't expect to find in the wilderness. This is what camping should be, I thought. A moment of connection in the middle of nowhere. But as the day faded into evening, I returned to my tent, the glow of the campfire casting flickering shadows across the ground. I was content, ready to wind down, when I saw Nathan walking around the lake again. His campfire had gone out hours ago. I'd assumed he was asleep, but now he was here, his figure cutting through the darkness toward me. Something felt off. A subtle shift in the air, like the lake itself was holding its breath. Nathan reached my campfire, his face illuminated by the orange glow, and I saw it. A change in his eyes, a coldness that hadn't been there before. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. He smiled, but it was hollow, a mask that didn't reach his eyes. "I found a spot," he said, his tone too eager. "A great view. You have to see it." I hesitated. It was late, the woods pitch, black beyond the lake, but his insistence pulled me in. "Trust him," a small voice urged. "What's the harm?" We walked to the other side of the lake, then plunged into the forest, the darkness swallowing us whole. There was no path, just an endless maze of trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Nathan moved with purpose, as if he'd walked this route 100 times, his flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. My unease grew with every step, the air growing colder, heavier, as if the forest was closing in. After what felt like an eternity, Nathan slowed, pointing ahead with a smile that made my stomach twist. "There it is," he said, his voice a low hiss. I stepped forward, expecting a scenic overlook, but instead I saw it. A rusted, abandoned RV, its metal shell overtaken by moss and decay, holes of rust gaping like wounds in the dim light. The air around it was wrong, thick with the stench of rot and something metallic like old blood. I turned to Nathan, my voice trembling. "What is this?" His face was cold now, empty, a stranger wearing the mask of the man I'd spent the day with. "Run!" my mind screamed. But before I could move, the rusted door of the RV swung open with a groan. A figure lunged out, a shadow in the darkness, and I bolted, my heart pounding as I heard Nathan and the other person chasing me through. The trees. Branches tore at my skin, the forest a labyrinth of shadows, but I pushed forward, driven by raw instinct. I didn't stop until their footsteps faded, until I was lost in the depths of the woods, the lake a distant memory. By sunrise, I found my way back, my body bruised and trembling. My campsite was empty, my gear, my tent gone as if I'd never been there. I stayed hidden in the tree line, watching the lake, its surface still and unfeeling, as if it had seen this all before. I made it to my car and reported everything to the local police, but they found nothing. No trace of Nathan, no RV, no answers. What was waiting for me in that RV? The question claws at me, a nightmare I can't escape. I survived, but every time I close my eyes, I see the lake, its surface watching me, and I hear Nathan's voice whispering through the trees. "You have to see it." The snow fell like a shroud, but the house held a secret darker than the night. I was on a road trip from Portland to Chicago, a grueling 3-day drive that stretched across the heart of the country. To break the monotony, I'd booked a series of Airbnbs along the route, craving the charm of unique stays over the sterile hum of crowded hotels. My first stop was in Wyoming, a state of wide-open spaces and whispered winds, where the route wound through desolate stretches untouched by the glow of city lights. The small town I'd chosen was barely a speck on the map, no more than 2 or 3 miles long, its streets lined with modest homes and shuttered storefronts. As I crossed the border into Wyoming, the sky turned heavy, unleashing a torrent of snow that blanketed the road in a thick white veil. The long day of driving stretched even longer, my hands gripping the wheel as visibility dwindled to a few feet. By the time I reached the town, the sun had long since set. leaving behind a darkness so complete it felt like the world had been erased. The streets were lifeless, the silence broken only by the soft patter of falling snow. I'd hoped for a quick dinner, a McDonald's, a diner, anything. But the town offered nothing, its emptiness a mirror to the hollow ache in my stomach. With no other choice, I followed the directions to my Airbnb, turning down a narrow road that led to a long, winding driveway. At its end stood a small house, isolated in the middle of a field, its silhouette framed by tall pine trees heavy with snow. I parked on the side, the cold biting at my skin as I grabbed my bag and trudged to the front door. Punching in the code, I stepped inside, the warmth a fleeting comfort against the chill that clung to me. The house was modest, no more than 500 square feet, with a cramped living room and a single bedroom tucked off to the side. The air smelled of old wood and dust, the kind of scent that lingers in places long untouched. A faded couch sat against one wall, its cushions sagging under the weight of time, while a small lamp cast a weak yellow glow across the room. I kicked off my shoes, the hardwood floor icy beneath my socks, and dropped my bag beside the bed, a narrow frame with a thin mattress and a quilt that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. Exhaustion pulled at me, and I sank onto the couch, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. Then a sudden noise. A dull thud echoed from the bedroom, sharp and deliberate, as if something heavy had shifted. My heart jolted, my body tensing as I turned toward the doorway I'd just passed through. What was that? The sound lingered in the air, a question I couldn't answer. I stood, my movements slow, and walked back to the bedroom, flipping on the light. The room looked unchanged, the bed still unmade, the bag where I'd left it. But the air felt different, heavier, as if it held a secret I couldn't see. I checked the small bathroom, its tiles cracked and stained, but found nothing out of place. The only other door in the room was a closet, its handle tarnished with age. I tugged at it, expecting it to open, but it held firm, locked from the side. A locked closet? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. At first I dismissed it. Perhaps it was a maintenance closet, a place for the owner to store supplies in a house with no other storage. It made sense, but the unease lingered, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. Shaking it off, I returned to the living room, sinking back onto the couch, my eyes heavy as I planned the next day's drive. The snow can't stop me, I thought, trying to focus on the road ahead. 15 minutes passed, the silence growing thicker, more oppressive. I stood, crossing to the window to check the weather, hoping the snow might have eased. I pulled back the blinds, the glass cold against my fingertips, and peered into the night. The darkness was absolute, a void unbroken by the lights of the town, the tall pine trees standing like sentinels in the storm. Snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless, burying the world in white. I let the blinds fall back into place, turning toward the couch. But something caught my eye. A shadow moved in the bedroom, slow and deliberate, like the silhouette of a door easing open. My breath caught, my pulse quickening as I stepped toward the doorway, straining to hear any sound. The room was still, the light casting harsh shadows across the walls, but I knew what I'd seen. Something had moved, something that didn't belong. I scanned the space, my eyes darting from the bed to the bathroom, until they settled on the closet door. It was still closed, its handle gleaming faintly in the light. But a chill ran through me, a primal instinct that screamed of danger. Something's wrong. I approached the closet, my hand trembling as I gripped the handle. This time it turned easily, the door swinging open to reveal a small empty space. Just a walk-in closet with bare walls and a faint smell of damp wood. Empty. The word should have reassured me, but it didn't. The air felt charged, electric, with an unseen threat, and before I could process the emptiness, a presence loomed behind me. I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs, and there he was, a large man standing in the doorway to the bathroom, his figure filling the frame. His face was a map of exhaustion, scratched and bruised, his eyes hollow with a weariness that made my stomach churn. He didn't flinch under my gaze, didn't speak, as if my presence meant nothing to him. He stepped into the room, his movements slow, deliberate, and knelt beside the bed, pulling a worn duffel bag from beneath it. The fabric was stained, frayed at the edges, a testament to a life on the run. He stood, the bag slung over his shoulder, and walked out of the room, out the front door without so much as a glance in my direction. I ran to the window, watching as his silhouette faded into the snow, swallowed by the storm until the lights of the house could no longer reach him. My hands shook as I dialed the police, my voice unsteady as I recounted what had happened. They came, took my statement, but their investigation led nowhere. Just a conversation with the Airbnb host and a vague promise to follow up. I left town. The next morning, the snow still falling. The memory of that night a weight I couldn't shake. Who was he? The question haunts me, a shadow that lingers in the corners of my mind. He might have been a drifter, seeking shelter in the storm, but the cuts on his face, the emptiness in his eyes, tell a darker story. I can't bear to think of what might have happened if I'd gone to bed that night, unaware of the man hiding, just inches away, his intentions a mystery I'll never unravel. What if the late-night delivery you thought was routine turned into a trap? A few months ago, I was working as a DoorDash driver, a side gig I picked up to make ends meet, usually clocking in 10 to 15 hours a week. I preferred the late shifts. Fewer drivers meant more orders, and the quiet streets at night felt oddly calming, like the city was asleep while I moved through its shadows. Around 1 a.m., my phone lit up with a new order. A small one, nothing unusual, but the drop-off address caught my eye, a business building on the other side of town, far from the usual residential spots I delivered to. Feel the stillness of the night. You're alone, aren't you? I accepted the order, figuring it was for some overnight worker pulling a late shift, and headed out, the city's empty streets stretching endlessly before me. I pulled into the parking lot of the building, my headlights cutting through the darkness, revealing a stark, empty expanse. No cars, no signs of life, just a two-story office structure squatting in the shadows. The windows were black, reflecting the faint glow of streetlights, except for a single light flickering behind the front door, its pale glow barely piercing the night. Picture this: an empty lot, a silent building, and that lone light pulling you in. I parked near the entrance, grabbed the food bag, and stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin, the silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. The building was smaller than most offices I'd seen, its facade plain and uninviting, the kind of place that felt forgotten even during the day. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone waiting, but the lot remained empty, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I approached the front door, checking the app for instructions. Enter the main hallway and leave the bag outside room 232. You've done this before, but something feels off, doesn't it? The door was unlocked, yielding under my push, and I stepped into a long hallway lined with closed doors, each marked with numbers in the 100s, 102, 106, and so on. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow, but the silence was deafening. A void where I expected to hear the hum of late-night work, typing, voices, anything. Instead, there was nothing. just the weight of my own footsteps echoing off the walls. In the middle of the hallway, a doorway led to a staircase, propped open by a small wedge, but beyond it was darkness, a pitch-black void that seemed to swallow the light. The instructions said room 232 was upstairs, but as I stood at the base of the stairs, staring into that inky blackness, a chill ran through me, my gut screaming that something was terribly wrong. You feel it too? You shouldn't go up there. I hesitated, torn between following the instructions and the growing dread pooling in my chest. I'd always prided myself on being thorough, on getting good reviews, but this felt different, dangerous, like stepping into a trap I couldn't see. Just as I turned to leave, a door across the hall opened and a man stepped out, his silhouette framed against the darkness of the room behind him. He wore street clothes, jeans, a faded jacket, not the attire of an office worker, and his face was hard, his eyes sharp, boring into me with a barely concealed intensity. Freeze. You're not alone anymore. He pointed toward the stairwell, his voice low, controlled. 232 is up there. I nodded, my throat tight, but I didn't move, and neither did he. We stood there, locked in a tense standoff, his gaze heavy, as if he were holding back something, darker, something violent. Run. Run now. I dropped the bag, the food spilling onto the floor, and hurried toward the exit, my footsteps quickening, my heart pounding in my ears. He didn't follow, but as I reached the door, I heard him move, his steps deliberate, heading up the stairs into the darkness I'd refused to enter. I jumped into my car, hands shaking as I started the engine, and sped out of the lot, the building shrinking in my rearview mirror, its lone light still burning in the night. I didn't call the police, not then, not with my mind racing and my instincts screaming to get as far away as possible. The next day, though, the police called me. They'd tracked my car from CCTV footage after the office reported a break-in. Let that sink in. You were there. The footage showed 3 men, one downstairs, the one I'd seen, and 2 others hiding at the top of the stairs, waiting, as if they'd known I'd come. That night, several other delivery orders had been placed to the same building, but the other drivers had been wiser, leaving their orders at the door, never stepping inside. What those men had planned, what might have happened if I'd gone up those stairs, remains a chilling mystery, a shadow that lingers in the back of my mind, a reminder of how close I came to something I might not have survived. The cabin stood alone in the forest, but it wasn't empty that night. Every year, my wife, Clara, and I escape the chaos of city life for a few days of solitude, a tradition that keeps us grounded, a reminder of why we fell in love. This spring, we chose a cabin in Washington state, tucked deep in the wilderness far from the nearest town. The listing promised peace, a retreat where the only sounds would be the wind through the trees and the crackle of a fireplace. It sounded perfect. For us, a couple weary of crowded streets and endless noise, we flew into a small airport, stocked up on groceries, and took a taxi through winding mountain roads, the landscape unfolding in breathtaking layers of green and gray. The driver's chatter faded as the scenery stole our breath. Towering peaks, endless forests, and a sky so vast it felt like it could swallow us whole. This is our escape, I thought, squeezing Clara's hand. A chance to be truly alone. But as the taxi turned down a dirt path, the tire tracks barely visible in the undergrowth, a quiet unease settled in my chest. The cabin emerged from the trees, small and solitary, its wooden walls weathered by time, surrounded by nothing but the endless forest. We stepped out, the air cool and sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth, and waved the taxi off. Clara's eyes sparkled with excitement as we carried our bags inside. the door creaking under my touch. The cabin was modest, a cozy main floor with a kitchen and living room, a ladder leading to a low loft where the bed waited, so cramped, you had to crawl to get in. It felt like a secret hideaway, a place where the world couldn't reach us. We unpacked our groceries, the rustle of paper bags filling the quiet, and made a quick dinner, our laughter echoing softly in the small space. With the meal done, we opened a bottle of wine, the ruby liquid catching the glow of the fireplace we'd lit. Sink into this moment, I told myself. Let it wrap around you. We sat close, the warmth of the fire seeping into our bones, talking about the days ahead, hikes we might take, stars we'd watch, the kind of dreams you only share in a place like this. The clock ticked past 11 p.m. The forest outside cloaked in darkness, a void that seemed to press against the windows. Then it came, a sound that tore through the stillness. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunched through the grass just outside the cabin. My heart jolted, the wine glass trembling in my hand. Clara's laughter died, her eyes wide with sudden fear. What was that? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. I forced a smile, trying to mask the dread pooling in my stomach. It's nothing, I said, more to myself than to her. Probably just an animal. I stood, my legs unsteady, and peered out the window. The darkness was absolute, a wall of black beyond the glass, broken only by the faint outlines of trees. I saw nothing, heard nothing more, but the silence felt heavier now, as if it was watching us. I opened the front door, the cold air biting at my skin, and stepped onto the porch, flipping on the outdoor lights. The driveway glowed faintly, a small island of light in the void, but there was no one there. The forest stood still, its silence a suffocating weight. I went back inside, locking the door behind me, and turned to Clara. "Did you hear it again?" I asked. She shook her head, but her voice trembled. "It didn't fade away," she said. "It just stopped, right behind the cabin." My bravado crumbled, the air in the cabin growing colder, thicker, as if the walls themselves were closing in. "Go up to the loft," I told Clara, my voice firm despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Stay quiet. I'll figure this out." She nodded, her face pale, and climbed the ladder, her movements quick and silent. I moved through the cabin, checking each window, my senses straining for any hint of movement. The darkness outside was impenetrable, a void that seemed to pulse, with a life of its own. I was at the front door again, steeling myself to step outside, when a sudden thud shook the cabin. My breath caught, my eyes darting to Clara. She was staring at the ceiling, her hands pressed to her mouth. Someone was on the roof. The realization hit like a wave, drowning me in panic. Footsteps echoed above us, slow and deliberate, pacing, back and forth, as if whoever it was knew we were listening. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed the police, whispering directions as best I could, the remoteness of the cabin making every word a struggle. We waited, the minutes stretching into an eternity, each creak of the roof a dagger in my nerves. Clara huddled in the loft, her eyes locked on mine, a silent plea for safety I couldn't promise. Stay still, I thought. Don't let them know you're afraid. After what felt like hours, though the clock showed only 45 minutes, the footsteps stopped. A heavy thud echoed from outside as something hit the ground, followed by the sound of boots crunching through the grass, fading into the forest. I peered out the window, catching the faint outline of a figure disappearing into the trees, swallowed by the darkness. The police arrived shortly after, their lights cutting through the night like a lifeline. They took our report, their faces grim, and drove us to the nearest town. where we spent the rest of our trip in a sterile motel room. What was that person doing out here miles from anything? The question haunts me, a shadow that lingers in the quiet moments. They were waiting for us to sleep or to step outside, their intentions a mystery that chills me to the core. We survived, but every night when the world grows still, I hear those footsteps on the roof echoing through the silence, a reminder of what might have been. The house I called home held a secret I'd never suspected, a shadow living just beyond my reach. For 8 years I'd lived in the same family-sized house, a sprawling 2-story nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It had been a bustling space once, filled with the laughter and chaos of roommates. But when they moved out, the emptiness settled in like an uninvited guest. The house was too big for just me, with 4 bedrooms that stretched down a long upstairs hallway. I claimed 2 for myself. One as my sanctuary, the other transformed into a gaming room where I'd lose myself in virtual worlds. The other 2 rooms at the far end of the hall were relics of a life I'd left behind. One held a few storage boxes, their contents forgotten, while the other stood completely empty, its door rarely opened. I never thought much of the extra space, until that night when the stillness of my home turned into a nightmare I couldn't escape. After a long day at work, I stopped by Wendy's, the familiar scent of fries filling my car as I drove home. It was just past 9 p.m., and with the next day off, I had one plan: game until the early hours. I settled into my gaming chair, the glow of the monitor casting a blue hue across the room, and slipped on my headphones, the world fading as I loaded up Call of Duty. But before the match could even begin, a faint sound broke through the hum of my headset. It was subtle, like a distant tap at the front door, but enough to pull me from the game. I paused, removing my headphones, and listened. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Maybe I imagined it, I thought, reasoning that if someone were there, they'd try again. I shrugged it off, diving back into my game, the virtual gunfire drowning out the unease. 2 hours passed, the clock ticking past 11 p.m. My focus locked on the screen as I racked up kills in a heated match. I was in the zone, adrenaline pumping, when another sound pierced the silence. This time it was louder, more distinct, like the faint thud of a door easing shut, or perhaps a muffled step on the hardwood floor. With my headphones on and the gaming room door closed, the noise was too faint to pinpoint, but it sent a chill down my spine. I tore off my headset, my heart beating faster, and opened the door, peering into the darkened hallway. The upstairs was a void of shadows, the only light a faint glow from the stairwell below. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for the sound to return. A minute passed, then 2, but the house remained still. It's nothing, I told myself, though the words felt hollow. I crept downstairs, my socks silent on the steps, and checked the front door. The street outside was empty, the night undisturbed, the porch light casting a lonely circle on the lawn. I made sure the door was locked, the deadbolt sliding into place with a reassuring thud, and headed back upstairs. This time, I left the gaming room door open, a precaution against the creeping unease that lingered in my chest. If it happens again, I'll hear it, I thought, slipping my headphones back on and returning to my game, though my focus was fractured. 20 minutes later, the match ended, and I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms with a yawn. That's when a shadow darted past the open doorway. It was quick, a fleeting blur just at the edge of my vision, but unmistakable, a human shape, moving with purpose down the hall. My blood turned to ice, my body frozen as I stared at the empty doorway. The air suddenly thick with dread. Someone's here. The realization hit me like a wave, my heart slamming against my ribs. I yanked off my headphones, leaping from my chair, but fear rooted me in place. For several agonizing minutes I stood there, eyes locked on the hallway, waiting for another sign, another movement. Finally, I forced myself to move stubborn, my steps tentative as I crept into the hall. The house was silent, the shadows unmoving, but the air felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. I checked every room, every corner, my breath shallow as I searched for the intruder. There was no one, no trace of the figure I'd seen. But when I returned to the front door, my stomach dropped. The deadbolt was undone, the door unlocked, a silent testament to an intrusion I hadn't noticed. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. The image of that shadow burned into my mind. They arrived quickly, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they searched the house. What they found confirmed my worst fears. Someone had been living in the empty room at the end of the hall, a space I hadn't entered in months. There were signs of habitation, food wrappers, a tattered blanket, a life hidden just beyond my walls. All this time they'd been there, watching, waiting, sharing my home in secret. The thought sends shivers down my spine even now. What if I'd confronted them that night, face to face in the dark? Some questions are better left unanswered. The darkness in my house felt alive that night, as if it had been waiting for me to wake. Just over a year ago, I was 24, living alone in a modest townhouse on the quiet edge of the suburbs, a place that often felt too empty for my restless spirit. I'd always been the kind of person who craved company, filling my home with the warmth of friends a few times a week. My closest companions, Lily, Mark, and a few others, would come over to share late-night conversations, their laughter echoing through the rooms, chasing away the silence that seemed to seep into the walls when I was alone. Sometimes they'd even stay over, escaping their own chaotic lives for the comfort of my spare rooms, their presence a shield against the loneliness that crept in at night. But on this particular evening, I had no plans. Lily was set to come over the next day for a movie marathon, a small ritual we'd planned to break the monotony of suburban life. For now, though, it was just me, the stillness of the house pressing in like a heavy fog. Let the night pass, I told myself, sinking into my bed at 9:15 p.m., the familiar hum of the suburbs lulling me into a shallow sleep. Tomorrow will be better, I thought, my mind drifting to the comfort of Lily's laughter, the glow of the TV screen, the safety of shared moments. But the night had other plans. Then I woke, my heart pounding like a drum in the suffocating stillness. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2 a.m., the numbers glowing a harsh red in the darkness, casting faint shadows across the room. My body was alert, every nerve buzzing with a primal unease I couldn't place, as if some ancient instinct had jolted me awake. Was it a nightmare, I wondered, sitting up slowly, my breath shallow in the heavy air? The room felt charged, the silence thick with a weight I couldn't explain, as if something unseen was pressing against the walls, watching me. I strained my ears, my senses heightened, listening for anything out of place in the quiet. That's when I heard it, a faint sound from downstairs, like a door easing open, the hinges protesting ever so slightly, followed by soft footsteps crossing the hardwood floor. My pulse quickened, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin, my mind racing for an explanation. It's Lily, I thought, grasping at a familiar comfort. My friends all had keys, a precaution I'd insisted on in case they ever needed a safe place to crash. She must have come early, maybe had a rough night. I stood, my legs trembling beneath me, and opened my bedroom door, the cool air of the hallway brushing against my skin. "Lily?" I called, my voice trembling in the oppressive quiet, barely above a whisper. No answer came, but a sudden light flared downstairs, illuminating the stairwell in a pale, flickering glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The TV was on, its soft hum drifting up to me, a sound so out of place in the dead of night that it sent a shiver racing down my spine. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, torn between relief and a growing dread that clawed at my chest. It has to be a friend, I told myself, clinging to the hope. Who else would turn on the TV at this hour? I descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last, the flickering light growing brighter as I approached the living room. The air grew colder with every step, the hum of the TV louder, more insistent, as if it was calling me closer. What I saw froze me in place. A man sat on my couch, his silhouette sharp against the flickering screen, the blue light casting eerie shadows across his face. He looked about 50, his long, patchy hair hanging in greasy strands over his shoulders, his clothes tattered and stained with dirt that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. He turned his head slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling intensity. A crooked smile spread across his face, a smile that held no warmth, only a quiet menace that made my blood run cold. "Come sit." His gesture seemed to say as he waved a hand toward the couch, the motion slow and deliberate, as if he belonged here, as if this was his home and I was the intruder. My body turned to ice, every instinct screaming to flee, my mind racing with the horrifying realization that this man was no friend, no drifter, but something far darker. I spun around, my bare feet pounding against the hardwood floor, and sprinted out the front door, the cold night air biting at my skin as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my neighbor's house, my fists banging on their door in a frantic rhythm, my voice shaking as I begged them to let me in, to call the police, to save me from the nightmare I'd just escaped. By the time the authorities arrived, the man was gone, leaving no trace except the lingering hum of the TV still on when they entered my house, its screen casting that same eerie glow across the empty room. The police brushed it off, their voices calm and dismissive, suggesting he was just a harmless drifter looking for shelter. But I knew better. That smile, that wave, they weren't innocent. He'd picked my lock with a skill that spoke of intent, sat in my home as if he owned it and waited for me, his intentions a dark mystery that gnawed at my mind. What did he want from me? The question haunts me, a shadow that lingers in every quiet moment, a fear that follows me through the night. I survived, but the safety of my own home is gone, shattered by the memory of that crooked smile, the weight of his gaze. Now, every night when the world falls still, I lie awake listening for the hum of the TV, imagining that smile in the dark, wondering if he's still out there, watching, waiting for the moment I'm truly alone. The darkness in my house felt alive that night, as if it had been waiting for me to wake. Just over a year ago, I was 24. Living alone in a modest townhouse on the quiet edge of the suburbs, a place that often felt too empty for my restless spirit. I'd always been the kind of person who craved company, filling my home with the warmth of friends a few times a week. My closest companions, Lily, Mark, and a few others, would come over to share late-night conversations, their laughter echoing through the rooms, chasing away the silence that seemed to seep into the walls when I was alone. Sometimes they'd even stay over, escaping their own chaotic lives for the comfort of my spare rooms, their presence a shield against the loneliness that crept in at night. But on this particular evening, I had no plans. Lily was set to come over the next day for a movie marathon. A small ritual we'd planned to break the monotony of suburban life. For now, though, it was just me. The stillness of the house pressing in like a heavy fog. Let the night pass, I told myself, sinking into my bed at 9:15 p.m. The familiar hum of the suburbs lulling me into a shallow sleep. Tomorrow will be better, I thought, my mind drifting to the comfort of Lily's laughter, the glow of the TV screen, the safety of shared moments. But the night had other plans. Then I woke, my heart pounding like a drum in the suffocating stillness. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2 a.m., the numbers glowing a harsh red in the darkness, casting faint shadows across the room. My body was alert, every nerve buzzing with a primal unease I couldn't place, as if some ancient instinct had jolted me awake. Was it a nightmare, I wondered, sitting up slowly, my breath shallow in the heavy air? The room felt charged, the silence thick with a weight I couldn't explain, as if something unseen was pressing against the walls, watching me. I strained my ears, my senses heightened, listening for anything out of place in the quiet. That's when I heard it, a faint sound from downstairs like a door easing open, the hinges protesting ever so slightly, followed by soft footsteps crossing the hardwood floor. My pulse quickened, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin, my mind racing for an explanation. It's Lily, I thought, grasping at a familiar comfort. My friends all had keys, a precaution I'd insisted on in case they ever needed a safe place to crash. She must have come early, maybe had a rough night. I stood, my legs trembling beneath me, and opened my bedroom door, the cool air of the hallway brushing against my skin. "Lily?" I called, my voice trembling in the oppressive quiet, barely above a whisper. No answer came, but a sudden light flared downstairs, illuminating the stairwell in a pale, flickering glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The TV was on, its soft hum drifting up to me, a sound so out of place in the dead of night that it sent a shiver racing down my spine. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, torn between relief and a growing dread that clawed at my chest. It has to be a friend, I told myself, clinging to the hope. Who else would turn on the TV at this hour? I descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last, the flickering light growing brighter as I approached the living room. The air grew colder with every step, the hum of the TV louder, more insistent, as if it was calling me closer. What I saw froze me in place. A man sat on my couch, his silhouette sharp against the flickering screen, the blue light casting eerie shadows across his face. He looked about 50, his long, patchy hair hanging in greasy strands over his shoulders, his clothes tattered and stained with dirt that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. He turned his head slowly, his movements deliberate, his eyes locking onto mine with a chilling intensity. A crooked smile spread across his face, a smile that held no warmth, only a quiet menace that made my blood run cold. "Come sit," his gesture seemed to say as he waved a hand toward the couch, the motion slow and deliberate, as if he belonged here, as if this was his home and I was the intruder. My body turned to ice, every instinct screaming to flee, my mind racing with the horrifying realization that this man was no friend, no drifter, but something far darker. I spun around, my bare feet pounding against the hardwood floor, and sprinted out the front door, the cold night air biting at my skin as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my neighbor's house, my fists banging on their door in a frantic rhythm, my voice shaking as I begged them to let me in, to call the police, to save me from the nightmare I'd just escaped. By the time the authorities arrived, the man was gone, leaving no trace except the lingering hum of the TV still on when they entered my house. its screen casting that same eerie glow across the empty room. The police brushed it off, their voices calm and dismissive, suggesting he was just a harmless drifter looking for shelter. But I knew better. That smile, that wave, they weren't innocent. He'd picked my lock with a skill that spoke of intent, sat in my home as if he owned it and waited for me, his intentions a dark mystery that gnawed at my mind. What did he want from me? The question haunts me, a shadow that lingers in every quiet moment, a fear that follows me through the night. I survived, but the safety of my own home is gone, shattered by the memory of that crooked smile, the weight of his gaze. Now, every night when the world falls still, I lie awake listening for the hum of the TV, imagining that smile in the dark, wondering if he's still out there, watching, waiting for the moment I'm truly alone. You made it through all 12, but maybe it wasn't just you listening. Maybe something else listened too. These stories aren't entertainment. They're echoes. Traces left behind by moments that never fully ended. And the deeper you dive, the louder they get. So if you feel a chill as you walk down the hall tonight, or hear a voice you can't quite place, you'll know why. Because once you let these stories in, they don't leave quietly. But if you're brave enough to keep going, there are more stories waiting. Darker ones, stranger ones, ones that haven't been told yet. So subscribe, turn on the bell. Come back for what's next. Because when it comes to true horror, the line between the story and the listener eventually disappears. And sometimes, the next story is yours.